From A&E, this is Biography.
He spent a lifetime in public service, but Gerald Ford will always be remembered for taking the highest office in the land at one of the lowest points in the history of the American presidency. Tonight, we're high above Columbus Circle in New York City, a town that remembers President Ford for his refusal to bail it out of an economic crisis in 1975. That refusal generated one of the most famous headlines ever to grace the front page of the Daily News. It said, "Ford to city, drop dead." It wasn't the only unpopular decision he made in the Oval Office, but in politics, as in his personal life, Gerald Ford has always faced challenges with strength and consistency. As President Clinton put it when presenting him with the Medal of Freedom last year, when he left the White House after 895 days, America was stronger, calmer, and more self-confident. America was, in other words, more like President Ford himself.
My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over.
He may be the only president we've ever had who did not, in one way or another, seek the office.
Good evening. I'm Gerald Ford, and you're not.
I don't think any of us thought he had the gifts, the skill, the power, the ambition to be President of the United States. He was truly accidental.
Jerry Ford was the right man at the time and did a tremendous job.
I, Gerald R. Ford, have granted a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon.
Basically, what he brought back was the integrity of the White House.
I don't care if he was president or if he was anything else. I think his character is what stands out.
I want to thank my predecessor for all he has done to heal our land.
The 1900s are thought of as a simpler, more innocent decade. But then, as now, there was violence. And Gerald Ford's mother, Dorothy Gardner King, was one of its victims. On her honeymoon, her new husband, Leslie Lynch King, beat her for the first time. Dorothy was terrified. But when King promised to mend his ways, she gave him another chance. The couple settled down in Omaha, Nebraska. And on July 14, 1913, Dorothy gave birth to a son, Leslie Lynch King, Jr. Dorothy's happiness did not last long. She had barely recovered from the delivery when her husband terrorized both her and the baby.
He came in and threatened to kill them both with a knife. With the help of a nurse and on the advice of a lawyer, she telephoned a lawyer who said, "You must get out of there as soon as you can, whatever way you can."
Dorothy moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, got a divorce, and rebuilt her life. At a church social in 1915, she met Gerald Ford, a paint and varnish salesman. He was everything her ex-husband wasn't. Gentle, well-liked, a man of his word. A year later, they were married. Gerald loved Dorothy's young son, so much so that the boy grew up thinking he was Gerald Ford Jr. There was no reason to think otherwise, not even after Gerald Sr. and Dorothy had 3 sons of their own.
He was just a good man and treated me as his stepson as well, if not better, than his own 3 sons.
The Fords instilled in all their children 3 basic rules: come to dinner on time, work hard, and tell the truth.
I know the most important one was integrity. That was one thing that both Mother and Dad were very insistent upon. The truth never got you in trouble at our household.
The truth may not have gotten Jerry Jr. into trouble, but his temper did.
And his mother coached him out of this temper and ridiculed him for the angry reaction he would have to trivial matters. And at one point, when he couldn't control his temper, she made him memorize and say Rudyard Kipling's poem, If.
If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too.
Over and over until he could calm down.
Jerry learned his mother's lessons well. He was a boy who seemed to like everyone, and whom everyone liked in return. One of those kids who did well at almost everything he tried. But what Jerry excelled at above all else was football. He was one of the best players Grand Rapids had ever seen. As popular as he was, Jerry didn't have the time or the money for a social life. The Depression hit the Ford family hard. To help make ends meet, Jerry worked in a hamburger stand across from his high school. And it was there one day that a stranger came looking for him.
And the stranger said, are you Leslie King? And Ford said, no, I'm Jerry Ford. And the man said, no, you're Leslie King. You're my son.
Leslie King Sr. was now a wealthy man with a ranch in Wyoming. He asked Jerry if he would like to come live with him and his second wife on the ranch. Jerry said no.
I couldn't help but think how badly he had treated both my mother and myself, and I felt that it was inappropriate for him now to interject himself into my life, where I had such a wonderful relationship with my stepfather and my mother.
If Jerry was bothered by his encounter with his real father, he never let anyone know it. In 1931, he was voted the most popular high school senior in Grand Rapids. The prize, a trip to Washington, D.C.
I can recall sitting in the gallery of the House of Representatives and seeing and hearing the debate on the floor. For a 17-year-old, that had an impact, I think.
That same year, Jerry ran for president of his senior class. He lost, but the idea of a political career was planted. He wanted to go to college and become a lawyer. Football was the ticket. He entered the University of Michigan and became one of the top players in all of college football. He even got offers to play professionally with the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions. Instead, Jerry got a job coaching at Yale, and at the same time attended its esteemed law school. In between classes and coaching, Jerry fell in love for the first time. Phyllis Brown was a young model whose beauty was showcased in the late 30s on countless magazine covers, ads, and calendars. And in one magazine layout, her handsome Yale boyfriend appeared with her. After graduating, Jerry hoped to marry Phyllis, put out his shingle back in Grand Rapids, and enter the local political scene. But Phyllis wanted to stay in New York and continue her modeling career.
It was a painful moment for both of them, but they decided that they would go their separate ways.
Jerry stuck to the rest of his plans. He opened a law office in Grand Rapids. Just as the firm started making a name for itself, along came Pearl Harbor. At 28, Jerry enlisted in the Navy and served as an ensign and later lieutenant commander aboard the carrier, the USS Monterey. The ship and its crew saw action in nearly all the major battles in the Pacific and earned 11 battle stars, surviving attacks from Japanese torpedoes, bombers, and kamikaze raids. And it was Jerry Ford's war experience that cemented his commitment to a career in politics. Like so many who served in the war, he came home with a greater appreciation of the role the United States had to play in the world. So when he returned to Grand Rapids, he got involved in the local Republican Party. Jerry also wanted to get involved with one of the most attractive and vivacious women in town, a former dancer and model named Betty Bloomer Warren.
She was a babe. I mean, she was great looking. Man, I look at pictures of him when he was young, and he was a good looking guy. And both of them were very solid people when they met each other, complimented each other a great deal.
They fell in love, and in February of 1948, Jerry proposed to Betty. But before they made their engagement public, Jerry made another announcement. He was going to run for Congress, challenging incumbent Congressman Barney Yonkman for the Republican nomination in Michigan's 5th District. Yonkman, a 10-year veteran of the House, didn't bother to take Jerry's challenge seriously, but Jerry did. He even went to work for a family of farmers in order to win their vote.
I'd get out there, help to clean out the barn, help milk the cows, and when you got through about 7, then you'd go into the farmhouse and you'd have one of those huge farm family breakfasts.
Jerry Ford's persistence paid off. On September 14, 1948, he won the primary. 1 month later, he and Betty were married. They spent their honeymoon on the campaign trail. It may not have been the most romantic way to start a marriage, but it launched a political career. In November, Jerry Ford emerged victorious in his congressional campaign. The newlyweds were on their way to Washington. Washington in 1949 belonged to Harry Truman and the Democrats. But among the handful of freshman Republicans who arrived for the 81st Congress was 35-year-old Jerry Ford and his wife Betty of Michigan. He made his mark quickly with a knack for meeting the right people, be they Republican or Democrat.
He deliberately made friends who could help him. It was not a crass thing he was doing. He just saw, this man can help me, and I will learn from him.
Once Jerry found a home in the house, he and Betty started a family with the birth of their son Mike in 1950. Mike was joined over the next 7 years by Jack, Steve, and Susan.
I think one of the most special times that I really ever had with my dad was when I'd go to the office with him usually on Sundays.
And you realize that there was something big going on here. Even though you were 6, 7, 8 years old, this was an important place, and your dad worked there.
But I did get out into the countryside outside of Saigon, and as a result had an opportunity to see some of the terrain in which this fighting at the present time has been going on.
By 1960, Jerry Ford was often described as the Republicans' counterpart to President John F. Kennedy. Both were youthful, vigorous, but the comparison ended all too soon.
The flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time.
Jack Kennedy was a good personal friend of mine. I admired him. I thought he was a fine legislator. And when he was assassinated, it was a real blow personally.
2 days after President Kennedy's assassination, President Johnson appointed Ford to the Warren Commission formed to investigate the murder. He was the only Republican member of the House to serve on the commission, and it was a difficult, emotional assignment.
Learning the grisly details of that tragedy was more than something I ever want to go through again.
Gerald Ford's sense of duty was not lost on his Republican congressional colleagues. In January of 1965, they elected him House Minority Leader.
As House Minority Leader, he was maybe one of the 3 or 4 most powerful people in Washington because no deal passed through Congress without his imprimatur.
But there was a price to pay for his new power. As Minority Leader, he was on the road more than 250 days a year.
Now, that wasn't a very helpful family environment, and it put on Betty a great deal of pressure and responsibility.
Betty began drinking. She also took painkillers for a pinched nerve. By 1965, her mind and her body couldn't take it anymore. She suffered a nervous breakdown.
I was really giving too much of myself and not taking any time out for Betty. It was all going to the children and my husband, and consequently I was a little beaten down.
Through psychiatric counseling, Betty recovered, and drinking became a thing of the past. Back on the Hill, Jerry Ford was now one of the leading voices of the loyal opposition. But in 1968, Ford was back on the winning side with Richard Nixon's election as president. Over the next 4 years, Gerald Ford's loyalty to Richard Nixon and the Republican Party never wavered. But on June 18, 1972, Congressman Gerald Ford heard news that astounded him. The night before, 5 burglars had broken into the Democratic National Headquarters at the Watergate office complex in Washington. One of the intruders was James McCord, security coordinator of the Nixon Committee to re-elect the president. Immediately, Ford wondered who had authorized the break-in. At a meeting the following Monday, he confronted John Mitchell, the chairman of the re-election committee.
I looked him right in the eye and I said, "John, did you have any knowledge or were you involved in the Watergate break-in?" And he looked me in the eye and said, "No."
Not only did Ford receive assurances from Mitchell, but also from the president himself.
Whenever I asked President Nixon, did he have knowledge of or was he involved in Watergate, I was assured by him personally he was not. And when he personally told me, I had to believe him.
But President Nixon did know about the break-in as early as June 23rd, only 6 days after it happened, the day this film of him was made. Instead of issuing an immediate apology and firing anyone connected with the break-in, Nixon and his staff orchestrated a cover-up.
Dick Nixon was a very proud person, and it would always be difficult for him to ever admit that he or his top people made a mistake.
Watergate had grown into a major political scandal when the Nixon administration was hit with another in the fall of 1973. Vice President Spiro Agnew was charged with taking bribes while serving as governor of Maryland. To avoid prosecution, Agnew made a deal with the Justice Department and resigned on October 10, 1973. Melvin Laird was one of several White House advisors who told the president that his best bet, the most easily confirmable replacement for vice president, would be Jerry Ford.
And we felt that we could get great support from Democrats and Republicans alike and get over this period by the nomination of Jerry Ford by the President of the United States.
Our distinguished guests and my fellow Americans, I proudly present to you the man whose name I will submit to the Congress of the United States for confirmation as the Vice President of the United States, Congressman Gerald Ford of Michigan. Well, they like it. Got a couple of times.
2 months later, on December 6, 1973,
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Ford was confirmed and sworn in as vice president.
we have demonstrated to the world that our great republic stands solid, stands strong upon the bedrock of the Constitution.
But the Republic was being destroyed by the Watergate scandal. Millions lost faith in President Nixon, in his ability to govern, and his honesty.
People have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Even as the threat of impeachment grew, Gerald Ford still believed in President Nixon's innocence and continued to support him. President Nixon, on the other hand, could be less than complimentary about his new vice president.
Nixon sat back in his chair and said, can you see Jerry Ford sitting in this chair? And obviously he felt that Ford would never become president and that this was his best protection against impeachment.
But in July of 1974, the House Judiciary Committee voted to begin impeachment proceedings against President Nixon.
Mr. Brooks.
Aye.
Mr. Kastenmeier.
Aye.
A few days later, Alexander Haig, Nixon's chief of staff, asked for a private meeting with Vice President Ford. Haig told Ford that the president was thinking of resigning.
Haig had provided 2 pieces of paper, one of which was a brief summary written by the White House counsel, Fred Buzard, a brief explanation of the president's power to pardon. And the other piece of paper was a draft pardon, where all that would have been necessary would be for President Ford to hand it to a secretary, fill in Richard Nixon's name, type it out, and sign it.
When Ford's key staff members found out what had transpired, they hit the roof. What Haig was laying out, they said, could be seen as a possible deal.
I called Al and said, Al, under no circumstances should you consider, or should President Nixon consider, any one of those options one that I'm involved in.
Days went by as Nixon vacillated on whether to resign or fight to the finish. Finally, on August 8th, he announced his decision.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
And as we said goodbye, he turned to me and said, Jerry, good luck, you can do it.
There's the president waving goodbye, and you hear the applause.
As President Nixon's helicopter lifted off, Gerald Ford told his wife, "We're ready." And then he walked back to the White House to take the office he never sought, the Presidency of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend
The Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
At 12 o'clock noon, August 9th, 1974, Gerald R. Ford, a man who never sought the presidency, was sworn in as the 38th President of the United States.
I am acutely aware that you have not elected me as your president by your ballots. So I ask you to confirm me as your president with your prayers.
Even though Ford hadn't been elected, America liked its new president at first sight. It was as if the guy next door was moving into the White House.
What are you taking with you?
Parachute trees. My high school annual.
Overnight, the formality of the Nixon White House was gone. Suddenly, here was a regular family living at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
You'd sit around at night with your 2 brothers or my sister or mom and dad and say, God, isn't this just bizarre? This is strange. I mean, how do we end up here? They were the only ones that understood it.
In the Oval Office itself, the air of tension that had filled it for 2 years vanished, and White House insiders noticed the difference immediately.
President Nixon was a very complicated, sort of introverted personality. And whatever he was telling you, you knew he was thinking of something else at the same time. And with President Ford, what you saw is what you got.
But America's honeymoon with Gerald Ford ended only 4 weeks after he was sworn in, with an announcement that enraged millions.
I, Gerald R. Ford, President of the United States, do grant a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon.
And that's when we turned on him, and that's when we began to hit all the negatives.
Good evening. President Ford spent most of today in staff conferences amid signs that he is still trying to recover from the nationwide furor over his pardon of Richard Nixon.
People are mad about it. They're irritated about it. They wanted Watergate behind them. They wanted Congress to get on to other problems.
But Gerald Ford, whether America thought so or not, believed he had to pardon Richard Nixon. To him, it was the first step in getting the country back on track.
From my point of view, the sooner I got the Nixon problem off my desk in the Oval Office, the better I could concentrate on the problems of our country at home and abroad. If I waited until indictment of Mr. Nixon, assuming he would, then some would have said, well, you ought to wait till he's convicted. And then others should say, well, you ought to wait until all of the appeals have been held. Well, that whole process would have taken 3 to 4 years.
But in 1974, Gerald Ford became a scapegoat for the country's frustration and anger over Watergate and Richard Nixon.
I mean, everybody knew Gerald Ford wasn't the smartest or most gifted politician ever to come down the pike. He was not very presidential. And we resented that, not because there was anything greatly wrong with him, but because we were so disappointed that every day wasn't sunny and perfect as soon as we got Richard Nixon out of town.
Ford was still feeling the heat from the Nixon pardon when he faced his first crisis as president, a personal one. The First Lady was diagnosed as having breast cancer. On September 30th, 1974, she underwent a mastectomy. At the time, few who had the surgery talked about it with anyone outside of their family or doctor. But the Fords went public with the First Lady's operation.
Just one personal note, if I might. I just returned from the hospital where I saw Betty as she came from the operating room. Dr. Lou Cash has assured me that she came through the operation all right.
And I thought, there are women all over the country like me. And if I don't make this public, then their lives will be gone. They're in jeopardy. And I think it did a great deal for women as far as the cancer problem is concerned.
Millions of women were inspired by the First Lady to get medical checkups, and hundreds of thousands of lives were saved. The president, however, still had a number of domestic and foreign problems to treat. In November, he went to Vladivostok to meet with Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev. Together, they worked out a nuclear arms reduction pact that has served as a prototype for all arms agreements with Russia since. And then there was Vietnam. After a decade of futility, America had had enough of the war. But President Ford felt he could not abandon the South Vietnamese.
I remember the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate came down en masse and met with him in the cabinet room. And they all said, the war is over, we're not going to give you any more money, pull the troops out, save the troops. And he wouldn't do that. And he kept them there to the last possible moment so that we could extract every possible Vietnamese who would have been at jeopardy had they stayed behind. It was a moment of supreme courage and little known.
Less than 2 weeks after the collapse of Vietnam, Gerald Ford's courage and his conscience would be tested by another crisis in Southeast Asia, one that could have led to the brink of yet another war. Only 2 weeks after the fall of Saigon in 1975, Cambodian forces seized the U.S. merchant ship the Mayaguez in the Gulf of Siam. Coming so soon after American troops pulled out of Vietnam, President Ford and his advisors worried that their worst fears about Southeast Asia were coming true.
We determined that this may be the initial stage of the communist Cambodian regime to make trouble, taking advantage of the fact that we had withdrawn both from Vietnam and from Cambodia within a month or two.
President Ford convened meetings of the National Security Council to discuss what action to take against Cambodia. Military advisors suggested the possibility of massive airstrikes. But what if the Cambodian government hadn't ordered the ship's capture? The voice of reason was provided by an unlikely source, the president's personal photographer, David Kennerly.
I pointed out that is it possible this could have been the act of a local commander taking things into his own hands? And if you did all this other stuff, it not only wouldn't do any good, but it would really look bad.
Kennerly's comments broke all protocol, but President Ford took them seriously. He opted for limited strategic strikes by Navy jets to support a Marine rescue mission. The operation was a success. The entire crew of the Mayaguez was saved. President Ford earned high marks for his handling of the situation, but personally, he was distressed that 41 Marines were killed during the mission. The problems never stopped. On the domestic front, Ford had to battle inflation as well as the worst recession in 30 years. To stem the economic tide, he vowed to oppose any new federal spending programs and successfully used his veto power more than 40 times. In the summer of 1975, President Ford earned yet another barrage of criticism. He accepted an invitation from Russia to attend the Helsinki Conference on European Security and Cooperation. Many worried that Ford was kowtowing to the Soviet Union, but the president used the conference to get Russia to commit to human rights agreements. By that summer, Gerald Ford was enjoying the office he had never sought. He also thought he was doing a good job, so good that he decided to run for election in 1976. And yet, even though he was the incumbent, there were more than a few obstacles to getting the nomination. On September 5, 1975, Ford's presidency almost ended tragically when Lynette Squeaky Fromm, a member of the Charles Manson family, pointed a .45 caliber pistol at him. Fortunately, a Secret Service agent grabbed the gun before Fromm could pull the trigger. Only 17 days later, in San Francisco, a woman named Sarah Jane Moore made another attempt on the president's life, and this time, shots were fired.
Hey! My God, there's been a shot. There's been a shot. Stay back! Get up on the sidewalk. We're being pushed back by the police. Somebody has fired a shot here. We don't know if anybody's been hit. My God. Somebody fired a shot.
The president escaped unharmed. Both Moore and Fromm received life sentences, but the fear never completely went away.
Dad had 2 bulletproof vests made to match his suits, and I never knew which suits those were. I didn't want to, because if I did see a picture of him on the news, out in the crowd, and I saw him in that suit, it would make me nervous and make me think, ooh, is there somebody there that we need to be worried about?
President Ford was still on the firing line as far as the press was concerned. Jerry Ford, the well-coordinated athlete, the savvy politician, took a backseat to a media image of a man who seemed to have literally stumbled into his job. To political cartoonists, he was a dream come true.
There was a lot of clown in all of us at that particular time as history as I look back at it.
We had a good day. I didn't fall once. How about that?
If irreverent comedians, cynical reporters, and would-be assassins weren't enough to hurt Gerald Ford's chances of getting the Republican nomination, along came another threat, in the figure of Ronald Reagan. The former governor of California challenged the president for the Republican nomination. But at the convention, Ford prevailed. Ford started out his campaign trailing Democratic challenger Jimmy Carter in the polls. Slowly but surely, he started gaining momentum.
I think to the public that whatever you thought of Gerald Ford and whatever his mental equipment was and whatnot, he knew the issues. And it was always surprising how much he knew about some of them up until the Poland thing.
The Poland thing. During the second debate against Jimmy Carter, the president made a statement that played right into the image of him as a bumbler.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
In his own mind, what he thought he was saying was that the Polish spirit was not dominated by the Soviet Union, but that's not what he said. And the questioner gave him another chance to recover, asked the question again, and he repeated it.
I don't believe, Mr. Frankel, that the Yugoslavians consider themselves dominated by the Soviet Union. I don't believe that the Romanians consider themselves dominated by the Soviet Union. I don't believe that the Poles consider themselves dominated by the Soviet Union.
And I knew right away we had a disaster.
But that's one of those mistakes I made. I didn't really accurately say what I meant, and I paid a penalty for it.
His name is Jimmy Carter, and now in just 78 days, he'll be the next president of the United States.
With his defeat, Gerald Ford kept the promise he made to himself and to Betty long before he ever knew he'd become vice president or president. After 28 years of service, he would retire from public office. And yet, within his 895 days as president, he made accomplishments in arms control, human rights, and the economy that few presidents achieve in 4 or even 8 years. Gerald Ford was entitled to relax, but in retirement, he would face yet another crisis, one that would nearly destroy his family. January 20th, 1977 was the last day of Gerald Ford's 895 days as President of the United States, his final day of 28 years in public office. And before it was over, his successor as president paid tribute to him.
I want to thank my predecessor for all he has done to heal our land.
In retirement, ex-President Ford remained busy. He was soon earning $1 million a year as a corporate director, investor, and speechmaker, with most, if not all, of his annual $3.5 million in expenses, the traveling, the Secret Service protection, picked up by the American taxpayer.
Ford was a bust as an ex-president. I think he had given everything he had to give. It had been taken out of him. It must have been an incredible physical and mental strain for him through those 2.5 years or whatever it adds up to.
But Gerald Ford was reaping the rewards of being an ex-president. Besides a home in Palm Springs, he owned a $2.5 million home in Vail, Colorado. He also had a wife who was slowly killing herself. Betty Ford enjoyed being First Lady more than she ever imagined. Once she left the White House, she felt lost. Her self-worth vanished, but she tried putting up a brave front.
The only time that I really felt emotionally perhaps upset was when we left the Capitol, because after all, Jerry and I were married in October and he was elected in November, and our whole married life has been spent at the Capitol.
Betty began drinking again, and she was still taking painkillers for an old neck injury.
There was a growing recognition in our family that the combination of prescribed pills by doctors and the alcohol, the martinis, gin and tonics that we both drank were creating some problems. And this was more noticeable to our daughter Susan than to me or to her brothers.
I kept saying, I'm worried about Mom, and, you know, she shouldn't be doing this, she shouldn't be acting like this, and, you know, with you being gone, you don't see it.
In an emotional, heartbreaking day, the entire Ford family, led by the president, confronted Betty about her drug and alcohol abuse.
My husband, once it was settled that they were going to do something about my illness, my disease, he took over and he took charge. He took it right out of the doctor's hands and put his arm around me and said, Mom, we love you much too much to let you go.
Just before her 60th birthday, Betty checked into the Naval Hospital in Long Beach for treatment.
I am absolutely convinced that if we had not had that intervention and we had gone along the same pattern or path, Betty would have died within a year or two.
A sober and drug-free Betty Ford began plans to help other victims of substance abuse by establishing a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center in Palm Springs.
And I speak for Mike and Jack and Steve and Susan, for Gail, for Chuck, and for our 3 beautiful little granddaughters. We're very proud of you, Mom.
As the years went by, the jokes about Gerald Ford faded away. Instead, he increasingly won respect for the manner in which he led America during his presidency.
We came from a Nixon who had virtually destroyed himself to a staid, solid workhorse of a man, Jerry Ford. And I think that basically what he brought back was the integrity of the White House.
Character, honesty, common sense, fairness. I mean, those are what my dad's about.
Anyone who holds the office of the presidency, I think that they have a fundamental choice, is do they want to be a political opportunist or do they want to be a leader? And I think Dad answered that question very soundly.
President Ford was so successful as a president that it was his undoing. When he came in, the country was in a psychological mess. In 1976, everything was back to normal and everybody was going about their lives, so they didn't need Gerald Ford.
We judge presidents by the 1 or 2 big things that they do. Nobody remembers whether Lincoln balanced the budget, and nobody cares, as they shouldn't. And in the end, President Ford did the one thing he had to do, which was hold the country together.
No doubt in my mind, politically, that I was able to heal the country after Watergate, after the terrible trauma of Vietnam, and the fact that we were able to heal those wounds and get us back on the right track, in my mind, was the best thing I ever did in my political life.
For the web's best bios, log on to biography.com.